Thank you everyone for coming, and welcome to our DEI Leader Network. And today we have our own Holly Wittenberg presenting. This is Diversity Works. We are a woman-owned firm in Washington, D.C., and we assess organizational needs regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We do assessments and a variety of different things to help you with your needs, the things that you may not know that you need additionally. And today Holly will be doing that. And the reason that we started the DEI Leader Network, we have monthly events because we identify that a lot of the DEI leaders that are out there are very difficult for them to really find people to connect with. And it becomes a little bit problematic because they're in a lonely world by themselves. So we offer this as an opportunity for them to learn and to understand what's going on, and then to sort of talk to each other so they would have support. So our monthly events have educational insights. We talk about assessment, and we also have a private LinkedIn group. So when we talk about diversity is about the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, and it's the more relevant thing to do. And we say that because the numbers show that it's not as in the right thing to do with everything going on in the world right now. It's very important. A focus on your organizational values will show you how to manage your workforce and how even show you how you spend your money. That's critical to remain competitive. The good news is that we believe it's both a business imperative and an advantage. So today we have for you this is about finding public data benchmark, and you don't have to subscribe to an expensive service. Holly will discuss that and tell you about it, and she will have some case studies to really go over the specifics.
All right. Well, thank you, Denise.
Of course, go ahead.
Welcome, everybody. I am sort of tasked with data analytics here at Diversity Works, and there's nothing I like more than poring over data and building spreadsheets as well. When we first launched Diversity Works and did our market research, talking a lot to executives at different companies, one of the bits of feedback that we took to heart was from the book Good to Great. It's a book by Jim Collins, and it really talked about why some companies don't ever go beyond good and are able to really push forward and become a great company. And I like this quote in the context of this discussion because what he's really emphasizing is that great organizations take a scientific and data-driven approach to analyzing their performance. They don't go in with a preconceived decision and try and convince everybody else to their way. They really debate those ideas. And so if you take nothing else away from this presentation, take away this quote that data can really serve to inspire, to push for creativity, and to really understand where you can improve from a DEI perspective. Diversity Works has a framework that we use for evaluating diversity, equity, and inclusion performance. And there are many areas within this framework where you can compare yourself to your peers. And really, that's all a benchmark is. It can sound like a loaded term, but just keep it very simple. A benchmark is just a peer comparison. And what we're going to emphasize here today are some simple ways that you can use publicly available data, free of charge, in other words, to compare your organization to peer organizations. We're going to use Kroger grocery store as our case study to give you some examples. But there are all sorts of ways that you can compare your organization, and there's certainly no shortage of expensive databases that you can pay for to do that comparison. One database that you'll want to be sure to tap into is if you are using an HR information system. A lot of them have benchmarking built in, and you can benchmark on things like turnover and number of days of an open position through those applications. We're not really going to tackle on that today because we don't know if you have one of those systems or not. Our emphasis today is to just sort of introduce you to some of the publicly available data sets that we use that we think could be helpful to you as well. So let me orient you just quickly to our framework. We believe that in order to use DEI as a transformation tool in an organization, you really need to look at all three domains: strategy, internal operations, and external presence. And so what is strategy? Strategy includes things like your statement of vision and values, the DEI business case, how you implement and communicate, and how you're holding leaders accountable. And last but not least, workforce composition, which we're going to touch on today. Internally, this is where a lot of DEI consultants focus, and rightly so. We just don't think it's sufficient. It's on talent acquisition, onboarding and retention, the typical things about advancement opportunities, benefits compensation, infrastructure and implementation, and employee wellness. And last but not least, external. We want organizations to think about how they are communicating their values externally, how they're building their teams when they think about product development or service development, how they're engaging with the community, how they're living their values. That's the philanthropy and sustainability piece. And also how the government is viewing their industry and how their government is regulating their work. And sometimes that's DEI related, like some states are pushing forward to have board requirements to have at least a certain number of women or people of color on a board. So that's just to introduce you to our framework. And then I've highlighted some of the areas where you can do peer comparisons relatively easily. And by the way, there's nothing I like more than talking about this stuff. So if you have a question after this, use the LinkedIn group and put the question there. The LinkedIn group link is in the chat, and I would love to help you any way I can. So let's start with the qualitative. So for those of you who get nervous when you think about Excel spreadsheets or calculators, this is for you. We wanted to identify a couple qualitative ways that you can compare your performance to your peers. And so these, again, are just a few ways. You can pull the vision and value statements of the different organizations. And on the benefit side, you can do things like look at Indeed and Glassdoor and see how they're communicating their benefits. So the benefits thing is interesting, right? Because you may actually offer better benefits, but you may not be using the tools in those platforms to communicate those benefits as well as you could. So one of the things you're doing not only is just comparing what benefits you offer to your peers, but how well you're communicating the benefits that you do offer compared to your peers, because obviously benefits is a big decision for candidates considering joining your organization. Thirdly, we have marketing, and I'll bring our marketing expert Elizabeth in to chime in on this one as well when we get to that page. But what we want to look at is how you're communicating your values externally, whether that's social media posts, your website, et cetera. So we'll talk about that. Now, my happy place, the quantitative spot. These are some of the areas where you can relatively easily benchmark your performance. And we're going to go through some examples in a minute. This is just to orient you to, again, some of the buckets. So in terms of workforce composition, we follow the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission definitions, which are flawed. We agree. The race categories are limited, and the gender is just male and female. There's no non-binary, and it's limited to organizations that have more than 500 employees in general. So, 100 employees. So if you are at a very small organization, you can still use this data, but just you'll want a footnote that the organizations listed in this data set may be larger than yours. No benchmark is perfect. There are always caveats, there are always asides, and all you need to do is just footnote them when you share them in your report. Internally, on compensation and engagement, one of my favorite websites is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is nerd central. And but they have a lot of industry-specific data about pay rates, about benefits, about unionization rates. And they've also got an offshoot called Occupation Finder, which is great as well, which can help you with job descriptions, but that's a whole nother webinar we can do later. I could do a whole hour on the BLS resources, frankly. Nerd alert, right? And then we want to tell you a little bit about the living wage calculator that MIT has developed. We're going to talk about that. And that is really to just see if what you're paying, it's not really a peer benchmark. It's really about, are you paying a living wage for your lowest paid employees? Last but not least, we're going to show you where you can find wage and hour violation and safety violation data. And those violations are obviously about equity. You know, are you paying your employees what they're entitled to? Safety violations, you're probably like, what does that have to do with DEI? All the research shows that if an employee feels psychologically safe to report a safety issue, that they will do so. And conversely, if they don't feel safe to report something, that you have higher safety violations and more safety risk. It's not a perfect correlation, but it is an indicator that you might have a problem of trust. And so we like to look at that. Again, no single benchmark is going to tell you the answer per se. It's all data to start painting a picture about how you're performing in different areas relative to your peers. So before we go into the next page, does anybody have any questions?
No questions so far.
Okay,
I
great.
don't see any at all.
All right. Well, don't be shy, people. I love this to be interactive. So the first thing you have to do is you have to figure out who your peers are. And, usually in any organization, when I worked at Compaq Computers in the 90s, which tells you how ancient I am, unfortunately, we talked about Dell and HP and IBM all the time. Anybody in our group would have been able to tell you immediately who our peers were. And I thought, well, why not just do grocery stores, right? I don't even know how I landed on Kroger, but I thought everybody knows what a grocery store is. I'm not going to pick some obscure industry that nobody's familiar with. So let's start there. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what industry you're in. And the way to do that is to look at the North American Industry Classification System, which is, often just referred to as your NICS number. It's a 6-digit number, but a lot of the reports that are available are only available based on the first 2 digits, the first 3 digits, which is fine. Don't worry about that. You work with the data that you have, the best available data. And sometimes the data is a few years old. But again, this is about painting a picture. It's not about absolutes. These companies hold this data very tightly. So it's not until they're required to share this data that they do. It's a competitive advantage to keep it close to their vest. So you're not going to get real-time data. It's always going to have a year or 2 lag. And that's absolutely fine for the purposes of this type of analysis. So I picked Costco and Albertsons, and I wanted to grab a couple pieces of data to make sure that they were the right peers. And what you see here is that Kroger has about 500,000 employees, which absolutely stunned me, by the way, to learn that they employed that many people. Costco has 300,000 and Albertsons has about 168,000. Now, the revenue, you can see Albertsons is a good bit smaller than the other two, but still they're all in the billion category. So, and they're some of the largest grocery stores or, retail stores in the country. So this is an appropriate comparison group. But in all likelihood, you all know who your peers are. Even if you're a nonprofit, you probably know who your peers are in terms of size or purpose, intent. And even if you can't find these numbers readily, you can probably find some data on like LinkedIn in terms of number of employees if they're not publicly traded. So then I go to my next favorite website, which is Yahoo Finance, and they've started including something called a hiring score. And the hiring score, you don't really have to worry about the underlying formula because very smart people at Yahoo Finance have figured out the hiring score formula. But what it's going to tell you is how effective are they at hiring? And so the higher number, the better the performance. So Kroger is a 67, Costco has a 6, and Albertsons has a 15. You might notice we're using traffic light colors, red, green, and yellow. And that is an old consulting trick to draw the eye and to allow people to quickly see which of these numbers is good. And because sometimes large numbers are bad and sometimes large numbers are good. So by using the color scheme, you draw the eye and you basically provide the insight immediately. Just Capital is another website that I really like. And Just Capital evaluates 951 publicly traded companies. And they look at across a series of metrics across all different types of stakeholders, right? So, do they treat their employees well? Do they have good governance? Are they operating as good actors in the community from an environmental standpoint? And they allow you to not only look up the individual company's score and compare it to the industry that they're in, which in this case is grocery stores, but they also let you look at overall. And so what we see here very quickly is that Albertsons is not doing well from an industry perspective. Costco is doing the best, and that's why we labeled it green. And Kroger's sort of right in the middle. So if I'm working at Kroger, I really want to understand what Costco is doing here to outperform. But then I want to look at how I'm doing overall against all sorts of publicly traded companies, because in some ways, those are also our peers. There are peers in terms of access to capital. And, if an investor is going to make a decision about whether to put money into Costco or Kroger or Google, they're going to look at the 951, not necessarily the 125. So both of these groupings have different purposes and roles and benefits to look at. But look at this jump. So Costco is still in the top quartile of the 951 companies. But look, Kroger falls significantly when you take it out of the industry. And Albertsons is in the bottom quartile, so really not performing well relative to other publicly traded companies. So what you kind of can glean from that is that actually the grocery industry is not doing very well relative to all publicly traded companies. It's one takeaway. There's another takeaway that I want you to get from this slide. You see that Kroger does $148 billion in revenue with 500,000 employees. But Costco does $227 billion in revenue with 300,000 employees. So without much, calculation at all, you can see that on a per employee basis, Costco is earning a lot more revenue. And that's something that you could tease out and highlight. And then Albertson sort of falls in between the two again.
Holly,
Hey, Holly?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Just going to say any questions?
yes, we have a question from Tish. Does the Yahoo Finance hiring score reflect how effective the companies are at hiring through an inclusive lens, or does the effectiveness measure not consider inclusive hiring?
Great question. It does not, but one would assume that your ability to attract talent is part of that is your messaging about the culture of your company. And so it's sort of a bank shot DEI related measure. And something like 75% of companies say the reason they invest in DEI is for recruiting and retention. So they know the link. And they'll understand the link between DEI and hiring. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions about that? Did I answer the question sufficiently? All right, we'll move on.
Yes,
Feel free to stop me.
will do.
All right, I'm gonna encourage Elizabeth to chime in on the next couple slides. We really wanted to make people who are less comfortable with numbers and analytics to still be able to do a peer comparison. So Elizabeth brings 25 years of strategy and communications experience to the team. And when she takes a look at DEI value statements, in fact, she's written a lot of them for our clients. She also pointed out that we should look and see where they are on the website. So that's what this does. And I just want to point out that, Elizabeth, you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I just want to say that one of the things that we really do look at is whether the DEI statement aligns with core values and is included in the about the company section of the site, which would indicate to us that there's strong leadership support for the DEI work, and that it's part of the core operations of the organization. When it's relegated to a careers page only, then that suggests that DEI lives only in HR and is not integrated more organically throughout the organization. So, to us, that's a red flag. And then, with the Kroger statement here being only located in the ESG report, that's really, just meant for a specific audience. It's not meant to be, part of their public face. So that would be a flag for us as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so this again is another template that you could use where you just simply find their DEI statement. We put the link down here and then where it is on the site. So the Kroger statement is part of their ESG report, which is environmental, social, and governance. It's very much an investor driven language. The people pillar is often used in a lot of the ESG reporting. So they are communicating this very clearly to investors on their website, but we didn't see a lot of language in other parts, even on the career side, about DE&I. Again, not right or wrong. It's an opportunity to consider the options, to look at what your competitors are doing and make a decision, be intentional about your decision, whether or not you want to put it in other places on the website. This may be a very strategic decision that they don't want to put it on their website and they only want an investor. As consultants or as internal DEI practitioners, we would just want to point out to them that there are different options that they can take. In terms of Costco, again, they have put it in their job section, which is very typical. We see that a lot. And it's clearly being used for recruiting purposes to attract candidates. And then Albertsons, we felt like had the strongest positioning as our impact is right on their main navigation on their page. And so with 2 clicks, you're immediately at their DE&I statement. So I just took a screenshot of the imagery that they have when you land on these pages. And as you can see with the models that they've selected, that they're emphasizing the diversity of their organizations. And in the case of Albertsons, also the diversity of their customers, which I really thought was a nice touch. They're at the butcher counter. All right, so the next thing that we've done here, and I'm not going to try and read this to you, but what I want you to think about is how you could set up a spreadsheet like this yourself to look at the social media. And again, Elizabeth, feel free to weigh in here. We felt like Kroger's doing a nice job across all 4 main social media areas, and then Albertsons too. And Costco has clearly made a decision not really to do any social media about DE&I across all these different platforms. So what do we see? What I thought was really interesting was both Kroger and Albertsons, they're not necessarily saying the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they have very strategically partnered with a diverse set of social media influencers who are hosting events and sharing recipes. And that's a great way. I mean, you don't need to be so explicit that this is a DEI message and have all your social media messaging just be a restatement of your DEI statement. Creativity is king. And Elizabeth, do you want to offer a little perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that's a really good point, Holly, is that when we're looking to evaluate organizations based on their messaging, we're not looking for very explicit messaging. we're not looking for messages that says this is a DEI message. We really do want it to be more organic and just to show rather than tell. So we're looking for that the DEI values to come out in their messaging through these platforms. And one thing I would also say is that customers are obviously an audience for these organizations on these platforms, but it's also how especially younger employees are evaluating organizations and thinking about where they want to work, and their values tend to be more aligned with wanting to see a DEI commitment, and so how you're talking about yourself and presenting yourself on these platforms is really important also for attracting talent as well as engaging your customers.
Great. And I just want to point out one thing about Kroger that I thought was really interesting. They definitely view LinkedIn as a recruiting site. They talked more and more of a corporate platform, which makes sense than the other social media platforms. They really talked about industry accolades a lot and featured those as a way to show that a third party has evaluated their performance and their commitment to their values. And so they use that again as an amplifying effect of what they've accomplished. So I want to show you a little bit about that. You may notice that we also showed how many followers there are where we had that data. And that's important too, because that gives you a sense of their reach. And that's very easily found on their landing pages. So here's some of Kroger's accolades that they shared on their LinkedIn page. They were recognized by Axios and the Harris poll as for their values, their reputation. They got the Bell Seal for workplace mental health, and they were ranked as one of the most trustworthy companies in the US. And again, that accomplishes a couple things, right? It tells you that Kroger had a plan to try and be recognized by these organizations, and then they took that benefit and used it again to further commit to their values and to use it for recruiting purposes. So in essence, also by looking at their social media posts, I was able to see the awards and recognitions that Kroger had received as well. Now, in this case study, I am Kroger, so presumably I would have known that I had these awards and recognitions. But if Kroger were my peer, this would be very interesting to me, and to see how they'd use these awards and recognitions to improve their brand.
And Holly, and as Elizabeth stated, it's another way to put out the messaging regarding DEI. You might not say exactly the words, but you're communicating through different channels, such as what they're doing, either to their social media, to different ways, internally and externally.
Exactly. Thank you. I also wanted to share some of the posts that I liked from Albertsons. On Twitter, they had their executive vice president and chief merchandising officer talk about equality and balance in the workplace, which conveys not only immediately you've got a woman in a very senior role in the organization, you potentially with a Latina name of Science, right? It's implied, not explicit. You also know that they're communicating the fact that they believe balance is good not only for the employees, but for the community. So they've touched on a number of different elements through this one social media post. They've also are going to be celebrating Juneteenth. And by the way, we just looked at the past 30 days to get this analysis. We didn't go back to a year or anything like that. You can really limit the time frame, or else it can feel overwhelming. And then I really like this post that they said, we celebrate our differences and believe everyone should feel safe being themselves. And again, that's about the psychological safety and coming to work as your authentic self. Denise, do you want to talk a little bit about coming to work as your authentic self?
Well, yeah, that's one of the values that we respect and honor. And when we talk to our clients, we make sure that they understand that that's an important piece when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Part of the belonging piece too is making sure it's the outcome that comes out of the DEI perspective.
Right.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. And then one relatively straightforward analysis you can do is you can look at the board of directors. And so this is the Kroger board of directors, and we give them really a great evaluation here. You can see that they've got roughly the same number of women as men. And about half of the board is people from underrepresented groups. The only thing that we might comment on is the fact that one of their oldest directors in terms of tenure does not have a photo on their website, and I could not find a photo anywhere on the interwebs for them, which for one of the largest corporations in the country to not have photos of all of their board members just struck me as a little odd. But all in all, here's some of the things that we look at. We look at the tenure. They've added a couple new members in 2021. You see Mr. Brown, Ms. Sewer, and Secretary Chow all joined in 2021. And if you read their annual report, you'll see they have a commitment to board turnover because they know that board turnover creates opportunities to improve the composition of their board. So really, really nice job here on their part in terms of board composition. The other thing we look at is we want to see that the committee chairs, which is what CC is, that those are spread around the board. And you can see that Mr. Sargent is corporate governance, Ms. Hugo is finance, and Ms. Gates is the audit committee. So a nice mix and spread of those committee chair positions as well, which is really critical when evaluating a board.
There's a question here that
Yeah.
asks why are the sexes separated? I guess on the board, Mikhail.
Oh, I just did that so that you could see the composition visually, and just intended to be a way for you to quickly identify who was a woman and who's a man. I'm not going to assign their gender to them. I don't know them. If they feel strongly that they're neither male or female, but using just common judgment, I guess, I group them accordingly. So, all right. But I will say the reason why knowing how many women are on the board is that it's shown that diverse boards, whether it's gender or race, outperform homogeneous boards. So that is why we look at that composition, if that's more the question that you had versus my PowerPoint formatting. All right, so this is where we get into some of the fun stuff, and this will be detailed more in the tip sheet. We don't really have time to go into it, but what we did here is, remember that NICS code we had, which started with 445? That's the level of detail that the EEOC data provide. So we looked and we selected executives and senior officials and managers as the job category. So now we're able to look at the executive composition of this industry. And what we see is that the industry is predominantly white and predominantly white male. And so when if I work at Kroger, I'm going to now look at my executive composition and say, am I above or below that? Again, it's not right or wrong. It's about seeing where you stand relative to your peers, understanding where your industry is. So your industry also doesn't necessarily mirror the American population, right? So hold on one second. Let me find my data point here. If the working population, if executives mirrored the working population, that it would only be 57% white instead of 81%. And it would be 30% white men, not 50% white men. So clearly the industry has opportunities to increase the diversity at the executive level. Any questions about that? And these are just screenshots from the Tableau And again, I'm happy to jump on a call with anybody that, wants to better understand this asset. So the next thing we're going to look at is just a quick pay analysis. And you can find most of this now on these websites like Indeed and Glassdoor. And I was able to find Kroger's average salary for the retail sales associate. And I learned that it was $12.79. And it tells you exactly how they calculated it, right? And then it said down here, compare all retail sales associate salaries in the United States. So now I have another opportunity to compare. And that's what this is down here. And that says that nationally, it's $14.79. So they are below other retail sales associates. Now, we're not comparing just grocery stores, right? Because you don't really compete just with grocery stores, especially in the retail environment. So it's appropriate to look at the position sometimes rather than the industry. So let's just keep this $12.79 in our back pocket. And now we're going to look at the living wage calculator, which a professor at MIT developed. Now, the living wage calculator estimates the expenses for a family to affordably live, to cover those expenses in a county. So it is not you shouldn't just say, you have to put it into context, what I'm trying to say, but let's keep it very simple for today's purposes. So when you go into the living wage calculator, you'll see that it tells you what one adult with 0 children, 1 child, 2 children, or 3 children needs to be paid in order to cover their expenses. Now, obviously, as an employer, you can't pay people differently because they have 2 children or 3 children. You have to pay for the job that they're doing. And we understand that, but this is context for you. They also have 2 adults, 1 working, and then they have 2 adults, 2 working, which didn't fit on the page. But let's keep it very simple for today and just say 1 adult, no children, because that's the lowest amount. Everybody has at least that expense, their own expense. So if you remember, Kroger's paying $12.79. I picked Cincinnati because that's where Kroger's headquartered. And you can see that it's more than the minimum wage, but less than the living wage. So again, if supporting your employees, paying them equitably is a priority that your organization has set, using the living wage as a way to evaluate what you're paying your employees can be an important component. Now, this living wage includes health expenses. So if you cover health expenses, that's something that you would want to factor in into this hourly rate. You would want to bump it up to include what you cover for health insurance. So last but not least, and then we'll wrap this up, one of the other websites that I mentioned is Good Jobs First. And what they've done is they have scraped all the regulatory and case sites for private claims against employers. And so it's a great site. It's not very expensive, it's about $25 a month. But again, a lot of the data is also available for free. And what we did is we wanted to look and see what safety violations Kroger, Costco, and Albertsons had. And as you can see, Kroger had a fair number. Now, remember, this is, a $148 billion company. $200,000 is not material for them. And they may view this as a cost of doing business, but still relative to their peers, they are spending more in an absolute dollar amount. And it could be a signal of a bigger problem, right? These are the cases that are being highlighted. Now, the other data that you might have in your organization is your workers' comp claims. We don't have that because that's not publicly available data, but that's another thing that you could add to this sort of a safety analysis, which would indicate potentially a psychological safety issue. And focusing on people having trust in their organization can help remedy that. And then we also look at what the violation tracker calls employee-related violations, and those are primarily wage and hour violations. But in the case of Costco, is also their retirement benefit administrator violations. And as you can see, Costco had a $5 million fine. This is just in 2022, by the way, calendar year 2022. Albertsons had by far the lowest. And again, just it's good to see where it'll tell you the location where it's happening. So maybe you'll be able to identify a particular location in your organization that isn't adhering to the employee laws, for instance. So we do this analysis for our clients. It's just, to give you a sense of how we present our data. And that's it for today. We want to just close by inviting you to join our peer community for DEI practitioners on LinkedIn. You can use this QR code. You can click on the link. It's also in the chat. And we really want you to feel like this is your community. As Denise said at the outset, DEI practitioners can feel very isolated in their organizations. They have few peers, small budget. And so we really wanted to create a means by which practitioners can interact directly with each other. And then,
Holly,
but not
Holly.
least, I just wanted to, go ahead, Denise, I'm sorry.
There was one question and I tried to answer it, but I wanted maybe your opinion.
Yeah.
It said, I think they want to know, how do you measure the working population at fully remote organizations? I listed a couple like time tracking, HR and payroll records, surveys and questionnaires, but thought you might want to expand on that.
Can you come off mute and just ask your question, please?
Sure. Am I audible? This is Tish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi,
yes.
Tish.
Thank you. And I was just thinking, Denise, I think I was not clear in the question. So thank you for sharing your information. Holly, how I was interpreting what you were saying was really about the employer and trying to figure out in the market, the surrounding markets, what is the demographic, what are the comparators or measures externally versus internally. And so if the organization, is based in Texas and Milwaukee, whatever, you can look externally. But if it's a fully remote organization, how do you create those comparators when people are dispersed? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're comparing. Are you speaking specifically of race and gender?
We can use gender, for purposes of this discussion, gender, or even, I think one of the areas for us is in early talent. So that Gen Z population that's now entering is in the workforce. Yeah.
So if you're trying to determine your own workforce composition using an employee survey where people self-identify on age and race and gender is obviously the easiest way to do that. When you're looking for comparative data, the age part, the ES data is really good for race, gender, and level of position. So you can look at clerical positions, you can look at service positions, sales positions. I picked executives for the purposes of this. But they do have a lot of segmentations, and frankly, I'd be happy to think it through with you, Tish, offline and understand really what you want. Happy to do that. Like I said, there's nothing I love more than nerding out on data. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics is always issuing interesting reports. Remote work is really a new concept. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal reporting that it's primarily working mothers, but I don't think people know yet.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Holly and Denise. Thank you both.
Oh, you're welcome. And
Well,
just want to make, go ahead, Holly.
We'll do questions in a second. I just want to remind everybody that Monday is Juneteenth and June 19th. And in 2021, President Biden made it a federal holiday. So, if you have an opportunity to engage your organization with an internal email or social media post, we recommend our partner, blackfacts.com, a great resource for a fact any day of the year. You just put the date in and you'll learn about a fact of Black American history. So with that, any other questions?
There's one question. I don't know if you have time, Christina. You want to come off and ask the question? It's how does an organization begin to change the gender racial inequality of their leadership? Is it legal to remove executive leadership to make the organization more reflective of consumers and clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. We believe there are a lot of levers to improve diversity, equity, inclusion and organization. If you think back to our framework, and advancement and leadership opportunities are the longest timeline. So when you think about the work that you want to get done, think of a matrix where you've got the complexity of the effort, right? So how hard is it to get done? How much time is it going to take? How much buy-in? And then the timeline. And that's going to be one of the thorniest. That's going to be one of the ones that's going to take the longest. But it starts at that strategy level of really deciding where the company wants to go. I worked at a company that shall remain nameless, but the CEO went on to become the CEO of another company, and he's been a great supporter of diversity works from the beginning. And I asked him about his journey as a CEO, and he said, I used to think that women made the choice to leave to have children and raise their family. And so if they didn't advance, that was the choice that they had made. And what I realized as I got older was it didn't matter if that's why they left. The outcome of not having any women in senior leadership positions was not the right result. And so he really made that result focus as his priority. It's a little abstract, but basically the point is you have to have leadership buy-in, and you have to remove, you can do it through assessment of your advancement criteria and how you evaluate employees, what development opportunities you give them, and remove the barriers for those leadership opportunities.
I have one more question, Holly.
Mhm.
Do you include metrics around neurotypical diversity and even things like accessibility, compliance, or innovation?
Yeah, those are all great points. We don't see a lot of good data around there. In fact, next month, you've just reminded me, we're going to do dedicate next month's session about attracting, hiring, and retaining employees with disabilities. So we don't have tremendous data. We are going to share some data about employees with disabilities in next month's session. It's certainly an area where the industry could do better to collect data and share data. I'm hopeful that a lot of these HR systems that are collecting this data will be able to publish that data for benchmarking purposes over the course of the next 5-10 years. And I would, as their customers, if you are working with those organizations like Workaday, push on them to do that. Say, we want this data. We want you to be asking in the employee self, identification process to identify if they choose whether they're neuroatypical or not. But it is a new frontier. The EEOC is about 40 years behind, even on their race and gender classification. So I have little hope for that. But really, again, the purpose of this was to share with you public sources, easy ways to get started. There's an old expression in consulting, don't boil the ocean, right? So we wanted to give you a little pot of water you could boil and not make you so afraid that you didn't take a first step towards creating some sort of a peer comparison. And by the way, there will always be gaps. There'll be some companies you find one data point for, not another. And you don't need to update it more than probably once a year, but just put it on your list of things to do in terms of your ongoing DEI evaluation.
And I just want to add, and remember, when you're talking about neurodiversity, you're trying to include everyone. It should be allowed for everyone. You want to include everyone in the process. And that's part of what your DEI plan should be about, your strategy, including everyone so no one's left out. And that means those that have the neurotypical diversity issues going on too.
Thank you. Any final questions?
Hi, this is Stacy. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. So this you may have touched on a little bit when you were talking about neuro diversity, but in terms of disabilities, as we know, there are non-visible disabilities, right?
Mhm, that's right.
And so, and I don't want to say use the word often, but some folks won't. They'd have to share if they're non-visible. They'd have to share about those disabilities. So I'm curious, do you have something planned down the road, or were you going to include it to a degree in the presentation on July 20th and talking about the non-visible disabilities as well?
Yeah, that's actually, we're going to have a panel, a group of panelists that are individuals with different types of disabilities. And we're still in the process of designing the session, but our goal is to have those people share their different perspectives. Some people might be, have visual impairment. One of our panelists is wheelchair bound, and another one might have a non-visible disability. So we're trying to get, and if you know of somebody that would like to be on the panel, we're still building that out. But yes, absolutely. Christina,
you.
do you have a question? You just appeared on my screen. No? Okay. Nice to meet you, though. I like your glasses.
Thank you.
All right. Well, please join us. Please join us on LinkedIn. We want that to be your community. Again, we want to create peer-to-peer connections. We welcome other DEI consultants. We don't have sharp elbows, as I like to say. We play well in the sandbox. And obviously, if anybody needs help with their DEI practice, Diversity Works is here and ready to support you. We will always get on a call. We don't charge to have a phone call with you. And like I said, I love to nerd out over this stuff. So, obviously, if you engage us, that's different, but don't ever hesitate to put time on our calendars. We love talking about this stuff. All right. Well, here's wishing everybody a happy Juneteenth on Monday, and take a moment to celebrate it and acknowledge it with your office mates. It's an important date in American history for all of us. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.